Rome's intervention in Egypt against Antiochus IV, taken from books 27 through 29 of the Histories by Polybius, translated by William Roger Paton, published in the Harvard University Press, 1927. Antiochus, seeing that at Alexandria preparations were being made for the war concerning Syria, sent Meleager as his envoy to Rome, with orders to inform the Senate and protest that Ptolemy was entirely unjust in attacking him. Possibly in all human affairs we should regulate all our actions by opportunity, for opportunity is more powerful than anything else, and this is especially true in war, for there it is that the balance shifts most abruptly from one side to the other. Not to avail oneself of this is the greatest of mistakes. Many men, it would seem, are desirous of doing what is good, but few have the courage to attempt it, and very few indeed of these who do attempt it fully accomplish their duty in every respect. After the war concerning Syria between Antiochus and Ptolemy had already begun, envoys arrived at Rome. Meleager, Sosiphanes, and Heraclides on the part of Antiochus, and Timotheus and Damon on the part of Ptolemy. At this time Antiochus was in possession of Syria and Phoenicia. For, ever since the father of this king Antiochus had defeated Ptolemy's generals in the battle at Panium, all the above districts yielded obedience to the kings of Syria. Therefore Antiochus, thinking that possession by force of arms was the surest and best, was struggling to defend the country as one belonging to him. While Ptolemy, conceiving that the former Antiochus had unjustly profited by the orphanhood of his father to deprive him of the cities of Syria, was not disposed to abandon these places to Antiochus. Meleager and his colleagues came therefore with the instructions to protest to the Senate that Ptolemy, in defiance of all right, had taken up arms first, while Timotheus and Damon were instructed to renew kindly relations with Rome, and to make an end to the war with Perseus, but chiefly to watch the audiences given to Meleager. About terms of peace with Antiochus they did not venture to speak, acting on the advice of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. But, after renewing relations of friendship and receiving a favorable answer to their requests, they returned to Alexandria. The Senate replied to Meleager and his colleague that they would charge Quintus Marcius to write about the matter to Ptolemy, as he thought best on his own authority. This was the way that the matter was arranged for the present. King Antiochus was both energetic, daring in design, and worthy of the royal dignity, except as regards his management of the campaign near Pelusium. After Antiochus had partially occupied Egypt, Comanus, and Cineas, sitting in council with King Ptolemy, decided to draw up a list of counselors from the most distinguished captains who should consider the situation. The first decision of this council was to send the Greek envoys then present at Alexandria to Antiochus to negotiate for peace. There were then present two missions from the Achaeans, one consisting of Alcetus of Aegium, son of Xenophon, and Pisidius, which had come to renew friendly relations, and another on the subject of the games held in honor of Antigonus Doson. There was also an embassy from Athens, headed by Demaratus, about a present, and there were two sacred missions, one headed by Callias the Pancratist, on the subject of the Panathenaean Games, and another, the manager and spokesman of which was Cleostratus, about the mysteries. Eudemus and Hicesius had come from Miletus, and Apollonides and Apollonius from Clazomenae. King Ptolemy also sent to represent him Tlepolemus and Ptolemaeus the rhetorician. These all sailed up the river to meet Antiochus. At the time when Antiochus occupied Egypt, those of the envoys from Greece who were sent to make peace joined him. Giving them a kind reception, he entertained them splendidly on the first occasion of his meeting them, and on the second granted them an audience, and bade them tell him what their instructions were. The first to speak were the envoys from Achaia. The next was Demaratus from Athens, and after him Eudemus of Miletus. As they all spoke in allusion to the same circumstances and on the same subject, the particulars of all speeches were very similar. They all ascribed the fault for what had happened to Eleusis, and, pleading Ptolemy's kinship with the king and his youth, attempted to appease the wrath of Antiochus. The king accepted all these pleas, even attaching greater weight to them than they did, but began to speak about his original rights, attempting to convince them that the district of Cold Syria was the property of the kings of Syria, laying a special stress on the conquest of Antigonus, the first occupant of the throne of Syria, and mentioning the grant made to Seleucus by the kings of Macedonia after the death of Antigonus. Further, he rested his case on the occupation of the country by his father Antiochus after a war, and finally denied the existence of the agreement stated by those in Alexandria to have been made between his father and the Ptolemy recently deceased, by which the latter should receive Coele-Syria as a dowry when he married Cleopatra, the mother of the present king. After speaking in this sense and convincing not only himself but his auditors that he was right, he crossed the Naucratis. After showing kindness to the people there and making a present of a goat stater to each of the Greek residents, he advanced towards Alexandria. He promised to reply to the envoys when Aristides and Tharis had returned to him. He said he had dispatched them to Ptolemy, and he wished the envoys from Greece to be cognizant and witnesses of everything. Euleus the eunuch persuaded Ptolemy to take all his money with him, abandon his kingdom to the enemy, and retire to Samothrace, who, reflecting on this, would not acknowledge that evil company does the greatest possible harm to men. For a prince standing in no immediate danger and so far removed from his enemies, not to take any steps to fulfill his duty, especially as he commanded such great resources and ruled over so great a country and so vast a population, but to yield up at once without a single effort such a splendid and prosperous kingdom can only be described as the act of one whose mind is effeminate and utterly corrupted. Had Ptolemy been such a man by nature, we should have put the blame on nature and not accused anyone but himself. But since by his subsequent actions nature defended herself by showing Ptolemy to have been a man who was fairly steadfast and brave when in danger, it is evident that we should attribute to the eunuch and association with him his cowardice on this occasion and his haste to retire to Samothrace. Antiochus, after abandoning the siege of Alexandria, sent envoys to Rome. Their names were Meleager, Sosiphanes, and Heraclides. He had collected 150 talents, 50 for a present to the Romans, and the rest for gifts to some of the Greek cities. During these days, Praxon and the others arrived at Alexandria from Rhodes, charged to attempt to make peace, and soon after proceeded to the camp of Antiochus. At his audience he spoke at length, alleging the friendly feeling of his own country to both the kingdoms, the family ties which united both kings, and the interest that both had in coming to terms. The king interrupted the envoy in his speech, telling him that there was no need for many words, for the kingdom belonged to the other Ptolemy, with whom he had long ago come to terms, and who was his friend. And, as the Alexandrians now wished to recall him, Antiochus would not prevent it, and in fact, he acted so. The Senate, when they heard that Antiochus had become master of Egypt, and very nearly of Alexandria itself, thinking that the aggrandizement of this king concerned them in a measure, dispatched Gaius Popilius as their legate, to bring the war to an end, and to observe what the exact position of affairs was. Such was the situation in Italy. In the Peloponnesus, when an embassy arrived while it was still winter from both kings, asking for help, there were several very warm debates. Callicrates, Diophanes, and Hyperbatus did not approve of sending help, but Aechaen, Lycurgus, and Polybius were in favor of giving it according to the terms of the existing alliance. For the people had already proclaimed the younger Ptolemy king owing to the dangerous situation, while the elder one had come down from Memphis and shared the throne with his brother. And as they were in need of assistance from every possible quarter, they sent Eumenes and Dionysodorus on this embassy to the Achaeans, begging for 1,000 foot and 200 horse, the whole force to be commanded by Lycurgus, and the cavalry by Polybius. They also sent a message to Theodorus of Sicyon, begging him to raise a mercenary force of 1,000 men. The kings were particularly intimate with the men I have mentioned, owing to the circumstances narrated above. When the envoys arrived, the Achaean assembly being then in session at Corinth, and when after renewing the friendly relations of the Achaeans and the kings, which were of a very close character, they brought before their eyes the danger in which the king stood, and begged for help, the Achaean people were ready to go, not only with a part of their forces, but if necessary with the whole, to fight for the two kings, both of whom were the crown and exercised royal authority. Callicrates and the others, however, opposed it, saying that, generally speaking, they should not meddle with such matters, and at the present time should most strictly avoid it, and give undivided attention to serving the cause of Rome. For this was just the time when a decisive end of the war was expected, as Quintus Philippus was in winter quarters in Macedonia. The people were now in doubt, and afraid of failing to please the Romans, when Lycurgus and Polybius, resuming the discussion, adduced several arguments, and especially the fact that in the previous year, when the Achaeans had voted to join the Romans in full force and sent Polybius as their envoy to propose it, Quintus, after thanking them for their zeal, had informed them that he had no need of the proffered help, as he was master of the passes leading to Macedonia. This, they said, proved that the possible need of the Romans for them was a mere pretext for preventing the dispatch of help to the kings. They, therefore, pointing out the imminence of the peril that threatened the kingdom of Egypt, entreated the Achaeans not to neglect this opportunity, but, mindful of their agreement, of the benefits they had received, and especially of their sworn word, confirmed the proposed treaty. The assembly now inclining to send help, Callicrates for the time threw out the resolution, intimating the magistrates by the assertion that the law gave them no authority to discuss the question of the dispatch of armed help in the popular assembly. When shortly afterwards a meeting was held at Sicyon, at which not only the Achaean Senate was present, but all citizens over 30 years of age, several speeches were made, and Polybius especially maintained in the first place that the Romans stood in no need of their assistance. A statement thought to be by no means made at random, as in the previous summer he had been with Quintus Philippus in Macedonia, and said next that if the Romans did really require their help, the dispatch of the 200 horse and 1,000 foot to Alexander would not make it impossible for the Achaeans to come to the aid of the Romans, for they could very well raise a force of even 30 or 40,000 men fit to take the field. His speech was met with approval, and the people were now disposed to send help. On the second day, when the law enjoined that those who wished to propose decrees should bring them forward, Lycurgus proposed to send them auxiliaries, and Callicrates to send envoys to make peace with the kings and Antiochus. Upon the resolution being proposed, there was again a lively debate, but Lycurgus and his party had much the best of it, for there was a great difference between the two kingdoms in comparison, since only rare instances could be found in which there had been any close relations between that of Antiochus and Greece, in former times at least, for the present king had acted with conspicuous generosity towards the Greeks, but the favors which the Achaeans had received from the kingdom of Egypt in former times had been so great and frequent that no one could have expected more. Lycurgus, by arguing thus, made a great impression, as the comparison showed the difference to be complete. For while it was not easy to enumerate the gifts conferred by the kings in Alexandria, there was not a single act of kindness of any practical value to be found which the Achaeans had met with from the dynasty of Antiochus. Andronicus and Callicrates spoke for a time in favor of making peace, but as no one paid any attention to them, they had recourse to intervention from a higher quarter. For a courier fresh from his journey appeared in the theatre bearing a letter from Quintus Marcius, in which he begged the Achaeans to follow the Roman policy in attempting to make peace between the kings. Now it was true that the Senate had sent envoys headed by Titus Numisius for this purpose, but the result had not been such as to favor this course, for Titus had found it impossible to make peace and had returned to Rome without achieving anything at all. Polybius, however, out of respect for Marcius, not wishing to oppose the letter, retired from the discussion, and in this manner the project of the kings to secure help failed, and the Achaeans decided to send envoys to bring about peace, their choice falling on Aechaen of Aegera, and Arcesilaus and Ariston of Megalopolis. Upon this, the envoys from Ptolemy, foiled in their projects of getting armed help, handed to the magistrates a letter from the kings which they had ready, begging the Achaeans to send Lycurgus and Polybius to help in war. Forgetful of all he had written and spoken, Antiochus was making preparations for war with Ptolemy, so that what Simonides said seems to be very true. It is hard to be good. It is indeed easy to be disposed to act honorably and to strive to do so up to a certain point. But to be consistent and under every circumstance, to be steadfast in our purpose, esteeming nothing to be of higher importance than justice and honor, is difficult. At the time when Antiochus approached Ptolemy and meant to occupy Pelusium, Gaius Popilius Laenas, the Roman commander, on Antiochus greeting him from a distance and then holding out his hand, handed to the king, as he had it by him, the copy of the Senatus Consultum, and told him to read it first, not thinking it proper, as it seems to me, to make the conventional sign of friendship before he knew if the intentions of him who was greeting him were friendly or hostile. But when the king, after reading it, said he would like to communicate with his friends about this intelligence, Popilius acted in a manner which was thought to be offensive and exceedingly arrogant. He was carrying a stick cut from a vine, and with this he drew a circle around Antiochus and told him he must remain inside the circle until he gave his decision about the contents of the letter. The king was astonished at this authoritative proceeding, but after a few moments' hesitation, said he would do all that the Romans demanded. Upon this, Popilius and his suite all grasped him by the hand and greeted him warmly. The letter ordered him to put an end at once to the war with Ptolemy. So, as a fixed number of days were allowed to him, he led his army back to Syria, deeply hurt and complaining indeed, but yielding to the circumstances for the present. Popilius, after arranging matters in Alexandria and exhorting the two kings there to act in common, ordering them also to send Polyaratus to Rome, sailed for Cyprus, wishing to lose no time in expelling the Syrian troops that were in the island. When they arrived, finding that Ptolemy's generals had been defeated and the affairs of Cyprus were generally in a topsy-turvy state, they soon made the Syrian army retire from the country and waited until the troops took ship for Syria. In this way the Romans saved the kingdom of Ptolemy, which had almost been crushed out of existence, fortune having so directed the matter of Perseus and Macedonia, that when the position of Alexandria and the whole of Egypt was almost desperate, all was again set right, simply owing to the fact that the fate of Perseus had been decided. For had this not been so, and had not Antiochus been certain of it, he would never, I think, have obeyed the Roman behests. End of Rome's intervention in Egypt against Antiochus IV, taken from books 27 through 29 of the Histories by Polybius.